It happened a long time ago, when Hyala's grandmother gave her life to save a small human baby captured by space pirates. All she did was cradle the child in her arms and run. Her dying screams were what alerted the authorities, and it was her back that shielded the baby from the guns the pirate crew carried. Hyala herself had only ever suffered because of her grandmother's heroic decision. She grew up in a family where her mother had been forced to fend for herself from a young age, eventually cornered by life into a marriage of convenience, one whose consequences extended far beyond Hyala's birth. This meant her view of humanity was far from positive. She understood, of course, that her own government had made it difficult for humans to offer any help to her family, and yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder, what would her life have been like if her grandmother had never saved that human? These very thoughts consumed her evening on what had begun as a typical day. The orange star of their system cast its warm light through the massive windows of her apartment building, making her purple skin shine like crushed amethyst mixed with stardust. This glitter texture a defining feature among her kind. She stood there, an elegant figure reminiscent of the mythical elves from human stories she'd once read. She had been wasting a few precious minutes of her break, thinking about her grandma and watching the perpetual motion of city life that was typical of planet Zabir. Spacecraft zipped between the towering black structures, their anti-gravity engines leaving faint trails of glowing energy in their wake. Pedestrians moved along the suspended walkways hundreds of meters above ground level, their forms tiny specks of color against the gleaming metal and glass. The city never slept, never paused, its 10 million inhabitants each minding their own lives. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet shook with such violence that she had to grab the window frame for support. An enormous explosion bloomed in her field of view, a sphere of white-hot energy that expanded outward from the government district, vaporizing 3 entire city blocks before her disbelieving eyes. The shockwave hit her building a second later, rattling the reinforced windows but mercifully not shattering them. Before she could even process what she was seeing, every single screen and sound-emitting device in her apartment, and she could hear the same happening in apartments across from hers, began to beep with the urgent, distinctive pattern of the planetary alert system. The holographic displays materialized unbidden in the air, their red warning symbols glowing with desperate urgency. The automated voice, usually so calm during monthly drills, now carried an edge of programmed panic. Attention all citizens, the planetary defense grid has been compromised. Our planet is currently under invasion by hostile forces identified as the Zionix Empire. This is not a drill. Seek immediate shelter in designated underground facilities. Repeat, this is not a drill. The war they had been fighting against the expansionist for the past 3 years had finally, impossibly, been brought to their home world. Hyala's long, elegantly pointed ears, each one nearly the length of her hand, drooped involuntarily among the cascade of her midnight black hair. The contrast between her glittering purple skin and the absolute darkness of her hair had always been striking, but now, as shock drained the usual vibrancy from her complexion, she looked almost ghostly. Her mind struggled to process the sudden planetary crisis unfolding before her eyes. This couldn't be happening. The defense grid was supposed to be impenetrable. The Zionics were supposed to be contained at the border systems, locked in a stalemate that had cost thousands of lives but kept the war far from civilian populations. Another explosion, closer this time, sent a spiderweb of cracks across the windows she'd been looking through. The safety programs kicked in immediately, the building's AI adding its voice to the numerous warnings. Structural security integrity compromised. All residents must evacuate immediately. Move away from exterior walls and windows. Proceed to evacuation routes in a calm and orderly manner. Calm and orderly? The words seemed absurd as Hyala watched a Zionix assault craft, all sharp angles and weaponized edges, streak past her window, its plasma cannons firing indiscriminately into the residential towers. She knew she should move, should follow the safety recommendations that every device was now screaming at her, should get away from the windows and prepare to abandon the building. But for a few more precious seconds, she stood frozen, her mind refusing to accept that her ordered life was ending. Then, against every instinct screaming at her to run, she turned away from the window and began gathering her personal belongings. Her hands moved quickly, grabbing the small hollow cube that contained images of her family, the ancient paper journal her grandmother had kept, and the crystalline data storage device that held her life's work as a cultural preservation specialist. These items represented everything she was, everything she had built, despite the hardships her family had endured. She couldn't just leave them. Another explosion, this one so close that the entire building swayed like a tree in a storm, finally shattered her delusions of having time. The windows didn't just crack this time, they exploded inward in a shower of reinforced glass, the blast wave picking her up and throwing her against the far wall. Pain shot through her shoulder where she was hit, and when she looked back, she saw that her apartment was now open to the burning sky, the strange smell of ionized air and melting metal filling her nostrils. There was no time for personal belongings. There had never been time. Hyla burst out of her tiny apartment, her few salvaged possessions clutched against her chest. What she found outside was a hallway filled with others of her species in various states of panic. The normally ordered residents of floor 127 had devolved into a pushing, shoving mass of purple-skinned bodies, all trying to reach the bank of elevators at the center of the floor. She saw families huddled together, their children's ears flattened against their heads in terror. She saw elderly citizens being pushed aside by younger, stronger ones. And then she saw him, a male, dressed in military fatigues, his chest adorned with medals that marked him as a veteran of the border conflicts. "My family has priority," he was shouting, using his considerable bulk to shove other residents away from the elevator doors. "Military families are to be evacuated first. That's regulation." His mate and two younglings cowered behind him as he literally threw a smaller male aside, clearing a path to the doors that were already beginning to close on an overcrowded car. The sight of such naked selfishness in the face of annihilation filled Hyala with a sudden cold clarity. She took one look at the panicking crowd, at the elevator shaft that was already making concerning groaning sounds as explosions continued to rock the building, and made her decision. Clutching her belongings tighter, she sprinted toward the stairwell access at the far end of the hall. She wasn't alone in her choice. A few brave souls, or perhaps just those who could do basic math about the likelihood of the elevator surviving a 127-floor descent while under bombardment, had also chosen the stairs. Hyala's legs, strengthened by years of recreational climbing in her youth, attacked the steps with the speed of a professional runner. Down and down she went, her breath coming in controlled bursts, her pointed ears picking up the sounds of others both above and below her in the stairwell. The arithmetic of survival was simple and brutal. 127 floors, approximately 20 steps per floor, 2,540 steps between her and the ground, between her and possible survival. She had made it down perhaps 30 floors when another explosion shook the building, this one seeming to come from somewhere in the middle levels. The stairwell lights flickered and died, emergency lighting kicking in a second later to cast everything in a concerning red glow. She could hear screaming from somewhere above. Had the stairs collapsed? Had the explosion breached the stairwell? She didn't slow down to find out. Her legs burned, her lungs burned, her shoulder, where she had hit the wall, sent shooting pains down her arm with every jarring step. But she kept going, her mind focusing on nothing but the image of herself reaching the ground, of her feet touching solid ground instead of artificial structure. The belongings she tried to save had been dropped somewhere around floor 80. She couldn't even remember letting them go, only that her hands were now free to grip the railings as she took the steps, 3 at a time. Floor 50, floor 40. The explosions were constant now, a drumbeat of destruction that seemed to be walking its way up the building. She passed a female collapsed on a landing around floor 25, her chest heaving as she struggled for breath. Hyla paused for a heartbeat, their eyes meeting in the red emergency lighting, but they both knew the truth. Stopping meant death. She kept going. Floor 10, floor 5. She could hear the ground level now. Hear the chaos of what must be hundreds of residents all trying to exit through the main doors at once. Floor 2, floor 1. Hyla burst through the stairwell door onto the ground floor, her breathing ragged, her legs trembling in exhaustion. The lobby stretched before her, its once pristine marble floors now covered in dust and debris. She could see the main exit doors, could see daylight beyond them, daylight mixed with the orange glow of fires and the stuttering flashes of energy weapons. She had made it. She was going to. The explosion that came next was bigger than any before. A devastating blow that must have hit one of the building's main support structures. The ground didn't just shake, it lurched, throwing everyone in the lobby to their knees. The sound was beyond loud. It was a physical force that hit her like a fist, making her internal organs vibrate, and then, with a shriek of tortured metal that she felt more than heard, the elevator doors at the center of the lobby exploded outward. The car had fallen. How many floors? She couldn't know. But the impact was catastrophic. Bodies and debris erupted from the twisted metal cage, and as Hyla stumbled forward through the cloud of dust and the particulate matter, she caught a glimpse of military fatigues among the carnage. The male who had fought so hard for priority, who had pushed others aside to save his family, had doomed them all. Her mind raced in pure, distilled panic now. The building was coming down. She could feel it in the way the floor was beginning to tilt, hear it in the grinding of massive supports giving way somewhere above. Her legs, pushed beyond exhaustion, somehow found new reserves of strength. She sprinted toward the light, toward the exit, toward the uncertain hell of the streets that had to be better than the certain death of a collapsing building. She burst through the doors and into a nightmare. The dense cityscape she had admired from above not so long ago was now a war zone. Zionix hovercraft filled the air like angry wasps, their sleek forms darting between the buildings as they rained destruction on anything that moved. The tall towers were burning, their surfaces cracked and melting, raining down sheets of superheated glass onto the streets below. Bodies lay everywhere, some still, some crawling, some running in directions that made no sense because there was nowhere safe to run to. And the Zionix ground forces were already here. She could see them clearly now. These enemies who had been abstractions in news reports for so long, bipedal, but wrong in every way that mattered. Their scales absorbed the light of the fires, a sickly green yellow that reminded her of infection and decay. Their mouths were too wide, filled with too many teeth, designed for tearing rather than omnivorous diet their intelligence suggested. But it was their eyes that made her stomach clench. Cold, calculating, with a malevolent intelligence that took visible pleasure in what they were doing to her people. They moved through the streets in coordinated units, their long tails usually wrapped around their waists like grotesque belts, occasionally unfurled to trip fleeing civilians or drag them back when they tried to escape. the underground shelters. She ignored the terrifying sight as her mind focused. She had to reach the underground shelters. Her building's designated shelter was 6 blocks away, its entrance hidden in what used to be a small park but was now a crater-filled battleground. It seemed impossibly far, but what choice did she have? Hyala began to move, keeping to the shadows of broken buildings, hiding behind burning vehicles, doing everything in her power to avoid being seen. Her purple skin, so beautiful in the sunlight, now seemed to glow like a beacon against the dark debris. She rubbed dirt and ash on herself as she went, trying to dull the telltale glitter, trying to become just another piece of debris in this dying city. She made it 3 blocks before she had to hide, pressing herself into the recessed doorway of a collapsed shop as a Xyanox patrol passed. Their weapons, brutal things that seemed to fire superheated metal spikes, were trained on a group of survivors they had cornered. She didn't watch what happened next, but the sounds would haunt her forever. 4 blocks, 5 blocks. She could see the shelter entrance now, or what was left of it. The small park had indeed been hit, but the reinforced entrance seemed intact. Its heavy doors still sealed, but with the telltale lights that indicated it was still accepting refugees. Just 1 more block, just a few hundred meters. A hovercraft descended directly in front of her. The Xyanox soldier piloting it was larger than the others she'd seen, his scales bearing the scarred patterns that marked him as a veteran. He brought the craft down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers as he blocked her path to salvation. Those eyes held no mercy, no hesitation, only a cold amusement that made her skin crawl. His tail began to unwrap from his waist, the appendage moving like a snake. This was it. She was going to die here. Just meters from safety. Another casualty in a war she had never wanted, but that had been brought to her doorstep anyway. The Xyanox soldier's mouth opened in what might have been a smile, if creatures with that many teeth could truly smile. He began to dismount from his craft, weapon trained on her, savoring the moment before the kill. Suddenly, an explosion erupted close to his scaled head, faster than either she or the Xyanox soldier could react. She froze at the sight. It was nothing like the massive blast that had been rocking the city. This was precise, controlled, a small charge that took the Xyanox head and most of his upper torso off in a spray of greenish ichor. The body toppled backward, tail still twitching in death spasms, as Hyla looked up in shock to find the source of her salvation. A human stood in the open ramp of a small ship hovering perhaps 20 meters above. The vessel was nothing like the massive warship she'd seen in military broadcasts. This was sleek, painted matte black, designed for speed and stealth rather than prolonged engagement. But it was the human himself that held her attention. He was holding what had to be the longest rifle she had ever seen, its barrel still smoking from the shot, the weapon almost comically oversized in his relatively small hands. And he was smiling, not the cold smile of the Xyanox, but something warm and genuinely relieved. He waved at her with his free hand, the casual gesture so at odds with the destruction around them that she could only stare. Before she could process what was happening, before her mind could catch up with the impossibility of humans being here, another figure dropped from the ship. This one had a rope around his body, descending with the controlled fall of someone who had done this many times before. He hit the ground in a crouch, already moving toward her, and she opened her mouth to attempt to say something, to ask who they were, what they were doing, how they were here, when he simply wrapped his arms around her and activated the recall mechanism on his rope. The sensation of being yanked skyward while held in the arms of a stranger would have been terrifying under any circumstances. In the middle of an active war zone, with her mind already overwhelmed by the transition from normal life to survival horror, it was simply too much. She went limp, letting the human carry her weight as they ascended rapidly toward the ship. Hands, multiple sets of human hands, pulled them both into the vessel. The one who had carried her up quickly untangled himself from the rope and moved to secure the ramp as the ship banked hard to avoid a stream of plasma fire from below. Hyla found herself on the floor of what was clearly a modified cargo hold, her rescuers moving around her as they smiled.
"Get us clear, Captain,"
the one with the rifle called out.
"Package secured."
Package. They were calling her a package. Some distant part of her mind wanted to be offended, but the rest of her was too shocked to care. The ship lurched again, acceleration pressing her against the floor as they climbed rapidly. She could hear the whine of energy weapons, the distinctive sound of shields absorbing impact, and the sound of humans as they coordinated their escape. But her eyes were fixed on the third human, the one who hadn't left the cockpit, but she could see through the open hatchway. A female, her hands moving across controls with the kind of control that spoke of years of experience. Her hair was pulled back in a practical style that revealed features that were sharp and focused, determined. This was their captain, the one who had brought a ship into an active invasion to save her? The moments of being frozen as the ship twisted and dove through fields of fire, Hyla finally found her voice. "My family," she gasped out, the words barely audible over the sound of the engines. Do you know anything about Axial City? My parents?" The male who had hoisted her, younger than the rifleman with kind eyes despite the circumstances, knelt beside her. "Already saved," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "Your parents are safe. The priority families, your family included, were evacuated first." "Priority families?" Hyla's mind struggled to process this. "But the president, the government..." The rifleman laughed, though there was no real humor in it. "Well, we'll get to them next. Humanity saves the important people first." "I don't understand." Nothing made sense. The humans weren't supposed to be here. Her own leaders had made it clear they didn't want outside intervention in their war. "How are you here? Why are you helping?" "We're helping you because of what your grandmother did, because of who she saved," the captain called back from the cockpit, her voice clear despite not turning around. "Because 72 years ago, Taylor Mordania gave her life to save a human child. Because that child grew up to become someone important. Because some debts can never be repaid. But that doesn't mean we stop trying." The ships shuddered as they broke through the lower atmosphere, the sky outside the viewports transitioning from burning orange to the deep black of space. Only then did the captain engage autopilot and turn to face them, rising from her seat with movements that somehow managed to be both military serious and warmly human. "Captain Jolene," she introduced herself, offering a hand to help Hyla to her feet. "That's Lucas on Overwatch. The one who grabbed you is Kylo. Welcome aboard the Retribution." "Retribution?" Hyla accepted the hand, surprised by how steady her own was, despite everything. "Not the most diplomatic name," Captain Jolene admitted with a slight smile. "But accuracy in the labeling has never been humanity's strong suit. We prefer names that make a statement." Lucas, the rifleman, had secured his weapon and was now pulling up holographic displays showing various parts of planet Zabir. Red dots indicated Zionix positions, blue showed remaining defense forces, and green... There were so many green dots moving in large formations. "How many human ships are here?" Hyla asked, staring at the display. "The entire Fifth Fleet," Kylo answered, pride evident in his voice. 4 carriers, 16 destroyers, 69 corvettes, and about 300 ships like ours. Fast movers designed for extraction and precision strikes. "The Earth Alliance said they couldn't help someone who hadn't requested aid," Captain Jolene corrected. "They said the military couldn't be deployed without a formal alliance treaty. They said a lot of things." Her smile turned sharp. "They didn't say anything about private citizens with military-grade hardware acquired through totally legal channels deciding to take a vacation in your system." "A vacation?" Hyla couldn't help the hysterical laugh that bubbled up. "This is vacation?" "Technically. We're all on personal leave, Lucas explained, checking his rifle with the absent movements of long practice. Amazing how the entire Fifth Fleet decided to take leave at the same time. Even more amazing, when we all decided to vacation in the same place. With military ships. Private vessels, Carlo corrected with a grin. Purchased fair and square when the fleet modernized. Sure, we maybe didn't remove all the weapon systems like we were supposed to, but who's checking? Hyla sank into one of the jump seats, her mind reeling. You're telling me humanity mobilized an entire fleet, disguised it as civilian traffic, and invaded our system to help us because of my grandmother? Not invaded, Captain Jolene said firmly. Intervened. And not just because of your grandmother, though she's the reason we're here now, today, instead of next week when it might have been too late. She pulled up another display, this one showing intelligence reports. We've had assets embedded in Xionox space for months. We knew this attack was coming. The only question was whether we could convince enough people to act in time. Your grandmother's story did that, Lucas added. When Admiral Jax, that's Kylo's grandfather, showed the Senate the intelligence about the coming attack, they hemmed and hawed about treaties and neutrality. So, he showed them the statue instead. Statue? Of your grandmother, Kylo said softly, placing his hand on her shoulder. In New Geneva, right in front of the war memorial. A Zalaran woman holding a human baby, running. The inscription just says, "Courage has no species." There are 9 statues of your grandmother on Earth, Captain Jolene added. Another dozen on Mars, 6 on Europa. Every major human settlement has one. We tell our children her story to teach them about sacrifice, about how goodness exists in this vast cosmos, about how one person's choice can echo across decades. Hyla felt tears she didn't know she'd been holding back start to fall. All her life, she'd resented her grandmother's choice. All her life, she'd wondered what would have been different if that night had never happened, and all this time, on a world light years away, human children were learning her grandmother's name. But my government, she said weakly. The laws will be sorted out later, Captain Jolene said with a shrug. What are they going to do? Arrest the entire Fifth Fleet for saving them? Her expression softened. We should have come sooner. When your mother petitioned for aid after your grandfather's death, when your family struggled, we should have done more. Your leaders refusing help is just a poor excuse for abandoning those who showed us what courage looks like. An alert chimed in from the cockpit. Captain Jolene moved back to her station, her hand tightening around the controls. We're clear of the gravity well, preparing for jump to rendezvous coordinates. My mother, Hyla said suddenly. You said she's safe. Where? On the flagship, Kylo answered. The AHS Taylor Mordania. The Admiral thought it was appropriate. You named a ship after my grandmother? A carrier, Lucas corrected. The newest one in the fleet. Commissioned 6 months ago when we started planning this operation. Oh, she's beautiful. 6 kilometers of the finest human engineering. Carrying 800 fighters and enough firepower to glass a planet. All named for a woman who never held a weapon, Captain Jolene added from the cockpit, a wide smile covering her face. Your grandmother saved one human child. Today, humanity begins returning that favor. Begins? Hyla locked between them. What do you mean? The Fifth Fleet is just the first wave, Kylo explained. Once word gets back to Earth that we've engaged, the Senate will have no choice but to formally enter the war. All of that for my species? She asked. All for you, Captain Jolene confirmed. Because 72 years ago, your grandmother looked at a sacred human child and saw someone worth dying for, and that debt has not been repaid yet. The jump drive engaged at once, reality blurring outside the viewports as they entered hyperspace. Hyla sat in silence, processing everything she'd learned. Her resentment toward humanity, carefully cultivated over years of struggle and hardship, was crumbling in the face of their actions. They had come, despite treaties and politics and the vast distances between stars. They had come. "Your mother will want to see you," Kylo said gently. "The Admiral, too. He's got a bit of a reputation for being stern, but he's been driving himself to exhaustion coordinating the evacuation. Kept saying he couldn't face your grandmother's memory if he let anything happen to her family." "I don't know what to say to any of them," Hyla admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Captain Jaylene called back. "Just be yourself. That's all anyone can ask." The stars streaked by outside, carrying them toward safety, toward family, toward a future that had seemed impossible just an hour ago. Hyla thought about her grandmother, about the choice made in a dark alley 70 years ago, about how a single act of kindness had rippled across space and time to save not just her, but her entire species. "Yes," she said finally, looking at Kylo with eyes that held both tears and hope. "I would be happy to meet the Admiral." As the Retribution jumped through hyperspace toward the human fleet, toward safety, toward the beginning of what would later be called the Liberation War, Hyla allowed herself to think, for the first time in her life, that just maybe her grandmother had made the right choice after all. The hyperspace journey ended with a subtle shift in the ship's vibration, reality reasserting itself beyond the viewports. What greeted them was not empty space, but a vast collection of human warships, more than Hyla had ever imagined could exist. The EHS Taylor Mordania dominated the view, its 6-kilometer bulk making even the other capital ships look small by comparison. Their arrival at the flagship's docking bay should have been overwhelming. The cavern of metal and light could have swallowed her entire apartment building, with ships of every size lining the walls in neat rows, their crews moving with practiced efficiency between them. But the vastness of the dock failed to impress Hyla, not because it wasn't magnificent, but because the shock of being thrown from her quiet evening into the chaos of war was still too much. Her mind couldn't process new wonders when it was still reeling from the horror she had escaped. Lucas and Captain Jaylene remained with the ship while Kylo guided her through the controlled maze of the bay. She found herself watching her own shadow on the polished floor, the way it stretched and shortened under the harsh overhead lights, afraid to look up at the humans bustling around them. Every face might judge her, might question why their fleet was here for her family. Her pointed ears caught fragments of conversation, but her mind couldn't focus on the words. A sudden clang of metal on metal, just a technician dropping a tool, made her flinch violently. The sound transformed in her mind to the shriek of her building's collapsing supports. Her whole body tensed, ready to run when she felt Kylo's gentle hand on her back. "Hey, you're safe now," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you are. Nothing can hurt you here." She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. They walked in silence for a few more moments before Kylo spoke again, clearly trying to distract her from the spiraling thoughts. "My grandpa's probably got good news for you already," he said with forced cheerfulness. "If those lizards have any brains at all, they're probably retreating from your world by now. The Fifth Fleet doesn't mess around when it comes to protecting people." "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate, but all she could manage. They stopped before a set of doors marked with military insignia. Kylo pressed his hand to a scanner, and the doors slid open to reveal a meeting room dominated by a single holographic display table. Two figures stood on the far side, their backs to the door, but Hyla would have recognized one of them anywhere. "Mother?" The old Zalarian woman turned, her purple skin dulled with age, but her eyes sharp with relief. "Hyla." They met in the middle of the room, arms wrapping around each other as tears flowed freely down both their faces. Hyla breathed in her mother's familiar scent, felt the comforting presence of her family after thinking she might never see her again. For a moment, nothing else existed but this reunion, this proof that they had both survived. "I'm holding you now," her mother whispered, pulling back slightly to examine Hyala's face. Then her eyes flicked over Hyala's shoulder, and her expression shifted. We are in presence of the Admiral. We should save our tears for later."
Please.
The old human said, his voice gruff but not unkind.
Don't stop on my account. Kylo and I can wait. Take all the time you need.
But Hyala's mother had already straightened, pulling Hyala to face the human properly. Admiral Jax was smaller than she had expected, age having bent his frame slightly, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but something in them held her gaze.
70 years, he said finally. 70 years I've waited to meet the family of Taylor Mordania.
He moved forward slowly, and to Hyala's complete shock, the Admiral of the Fifth Fleet bowed deeply to both of them.
I am Henry Jax. I was the baby your grandmother saved.
The words hit Hyala like a heavy blow. This wasn't a simple human military leader. This was the child her grandmother had died protecting, now grown old in service to others. "Sir," her mother stated, but he raised a hand.
Please, let me finish.
He moved to the holographic display, bringing up a real-time visualization of planet Sabir. Green dots, human forces, had formed a protective barrier around the planet, while red dots, the Zionix, were in full retreat.
Your world is safe. We've driven them back to their staging areas and destroyed their capacity to mount another assault. But that doesn't feel nearly enough to repay my debt.
He turned back to them, and Hyala could see the weight of decades in his eyes.
I would not be here without your mother, your grandmother. My grandson would not exist. My kids, the lives I've been able to save in my career. None of it would have happened if Taylor Mordania had made a different choice that night.
"Admiral," Hyala's mother said softly, "you've already done so much. You've saved our world, our people."
I've done what any decent person would do when they had the power to help,
he interrupted gently.
But I've carried the weight of this debt my entire life. When I learned what happened to your family after your mother's sacrifice, how bureaucracy failed you.
His hands clenched briefly.
I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry it took us this long.
Hyala found herself speaking without conscious thought. She never expected repayment, my grandmother. From what Mother told me, she just saw a scared child and acted.
Which makes the debt all the greater,
the Admiral replied. He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision.
I have a proposal. It's not enough. Nothing could ever be enough. But I'd like to offer you both the chance to live in one of our colonies for a while. Eden Prime is beautiful, terraformed to perfection, peaceful. You'd have unlimited passage back and forth to your world, of course. But after what you've been through, perhaps some time away might help.
Hyala looked at her mother, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. Just hours ago, she had resented humanity for the hardships they'd endured. Now, this human was offering them a new start, a chance to heal. Why was she even considering it? We'll accept, her mother said slowly, if Hyala agrees. Hyala nodded, not trusting her voice. The Admiral's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him.
Excellent. Kylo will help you get settled. He's been pestering me for weeks about meeting you both. Apparently, the young men at the academy think of your grandmother as something of a patron saint of the fleet. As arrangements were discussed and plans were made, Hyla found herself studying the faces around her. The Admiral, who had lived his entire life shaped by her grandmother's sacrifice. Kylo, who existed only because his grandfather had been saved. Her mother, who had endured so much but was still here. And herself, whose resentment had transformed into something else entirely. They weren't quite family, not yet at least, but the bond her grandmother had created with that single act of courage had stretched across space and time, growing stronger instead of weaker. It had brought a human fleet to save their world. It had turned strangers into protectors, debt into dedication. Perhaps, Hyla thought as she watched the Admiral and her mother discuss transport arrangements while Kylo offered enthusiastic suggestions about places to visit on Eden Prime. Perhaps this was what her grandmother had seen that night. Not just a scared child to save, but a future where kindness could echo across stars, where one act of love could save millions. The friendship her grandmother had forged in those final moments had saved them all. And perhaps, in both her personal life and the turbulent relationship between their species, it could still grow into something even stronger in the days to come.